The chatter in the church hushed for a moment, then picked up again with a different kind of energy. All heads turned. The bride wasn't standing where she was supposed to be. Emily had disappeared from the bridal room minutes before the processional. And now, to everyone's shock, there she was, bolting across the white-carpeted aisle, lifting the edge of her lace gown so it wouldn't trip her as she ran. Her veil fluttered behind her like a flag caught in wind. She wasn't running to the altar. She was running to the door. Outside, standing uncertainly beneath the arched church entrance, was a black man in a worn but carefully pressed suit. His silver-streaked hair was combed back neatly. His shoes, though scuffed, had clearly been polished that morning. He stood still, arms at his sides, shoulders squared but unsure. Some guests leaned into each other and whispered, "Is he lost? Is he begging? Don't tell me she invited him." Emily reached him in seconds and threw her arms around him before anyone could stop her. The man's body stiffened for a moment, startled, but then gently, almost protectively, his arms came up and embraced her. Inside the church, jaws dropped. The wedding planner stood frozen near the aisle, tablet clutched against her chest, trying to process what was happening. "Who is he?" someone whispered. "I think I've seen him around. Isn't he the guy from the bakery bench?" God, she really is too kind. Poor girl. Emily didn't hear any of it. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I remember your eyes. That first morning, you looked so cold." The man smiled faintly, "And you looked like the sun had hands." Behind them, a sound cut through the murmuring like a blade. Vehicle engines pulling up fast, stopping just outside the church. Then boots, heavy, synchronized footsteps, polished leather meeting pavement. The double doors swung open with force and purpose. 12 United States Marines stepped inside, in full dress blues, their white gloves flawless, medals gleaming under the stained glass light. The lead Marine marched forward, posture precise, stopping just inside the church. The others formed a line at the doorway, holding perfect formation. A few guests gasped aloud. One woman clutched her husband's arm. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered against the floor, echoing across the stunned silence. The Marine at the front looked straight at the man Emily was still holding. Then he saluted. In perfect unison, the other 11 Marines followed. A full ceremonial salute for a man they hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A man the church guests had just mistaken for a street beggar. Gasps turned into silence. Eyes widened. Shoulders dropped. Mouths hung open in disbelief. The whispers stopped. All that remained was the sound of formal honor clashing with quiet judgment. Emily stepped back slightly, but kept holding the man's arm. Her veil had slipped off and lay on the church floor, unnoticed. Her makeup was already streaked with tears. The man didn't say a word, but his eyes, deep, tired, and weathered by years of being unseen, locked onto the Marine saluting him. And for a moment, something shifted in his face. Pride, pain, maybe both. A child in the pews whispered, "Mom, are those soldiers saluting that man?" And the mother, unsure how to respond, just said, "Yes, baby, they are." From the back row, someone muttered, "What's going on?" The Marine captain's voice carried across the church like a drumbeat. "We're here to honor the man who was invisible to you." No one dared speak again. And outside, as the American flag fluttered in the breeze above the church, every passing car slowed at the sight of the 12 Marines standing still, honoring someone the rest of the world had once chosen not to see. Before she became a bride standing in shock before 12 Marines, Emily Sanchez was just the woman who arrived earlier than everyone else. At 4:30 a.m. sharp, the door of Sunrise Bakery in San Diego creaked open, and Emily stepped in carrying her tote, her apron, and her quiet resolve. She had been the head pastry chef there for 6 years, and her cinnamon rolls were the reason people formed lines down the block. But that's not what people in the neighborhood really remembered her for. Every morning, as the ovens hissed with the day's first batch, Emily would wrap one warm pastry and pour a fresh cup of black coffee into a to-go container. Then she'd grab a napkin, scribble a quick message, and slip out the back door. Her route never changed. Down the alley, past the closed barber shop, to the old iron bench near the bus stop. The man was always there. A black man in his 60s, maybe. Quiet, still, layers of coats wrapped around him even when the sun rose high. His hair was silver, beard trimmed but rugged. He never begged, never even asked for food. He just sat. Emily placed the food beside him and set the napkin on top. Sometimes she'd write, "Hope today is peaceful." Other days it was simply, "Take care." He would nod silently, eyes never quite meeting hers. Then she'd walk away, back to the dough, back to the world that never asked why she did it. Her co-workers noticed, of course. At first, they were amused. "She's giving away the good stuff," one whispered. "Bet he sells it later," another laughed. As months turned into years, the whispers sharpened. New hires rolled their eyes. One manager joked during a morning meeting, "Maybe we should just start a charity line out back. Call it the Emily Discount." She never responded, just kept working the flour, folding butter into pastry sheets, shaping perfection while pretending not to hear. But she wasn't deaf to it. Once, after she'd slipped back in from her usual drop-off, she heard a cashier say, "You know he's probably just another addict." Or worse. Another replied, "Yeah, and she's feeding him like a pet." Emily's hand paused mid-roll. She said nothing, but that night she went home and took out one of her scarves. It was old but warm, wool with a navy blue weave. She folded it gently and laid it next to her apron. The next morning, the man was already there. His hands were red from the wind, his shoulders hunched low. Emily didn't say anything. She just set down the pastry, the coffee, and placed the scarf beside them. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he looked up, really looked at her, for the first time. His eyes held something more than surprise, something like shame, or maybe recognition. She nodded once and turned to leave. The next day, the scarf was wrapped around his neck, and on top of the coffee cup, a napkin rested. Her own message had been written over, the ink trembling but clear. "Thank you for seeing me as a man." Emily froze. That napkin stayed with her. She folded it into a small plastic sleeve and kept it in her wallet, right behind her license. Every time she got frustrated, overwhelmed, or tired of the mockery, she'd take it out and read it again. She never asked his name. He never asked hers. But somehow, that routine became the most honest relationship in her life. Some people said she was soft-hearted. Her mother worried she was being taken advantage of. "He'll ask you for more, Emily. One day, he'll show up at your house." But he never did. He never crossed the line. He just sat there, waiting quietly for her offering of warmth and dignity. And she never missed a single day. Rain or sun, pastry or muffin, coffee black with no sugar. The city changed around them. Shops opened, shut, reopened. New apartment complexes rose behind the alley. But that bench, that man, that ritual, it stayed. It was never for praise. It was never for likes. And in 6 years, Emily never once told anyone the truth about why she did it. Because even if the rest of the world had forgotten him, she hadn't. Because he was not a problem. He was a person. The complaints started as whispers, but didn't stay that way. It was a Tuesday morning when Emily was called into the manager's office. The new regional director, a sharp-suited woman named Dana, was already seated with a clipboard in her lap. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Emily," she said smoothly, "you've been with us for a long time. We value your consistency." Emily nodded, unsure why this didn't feel like a compliment. "But," Dana continued, flipping a page, "some of our regulars have expressed concerns. One mentioned feeling uncomfortable walking past the alley entrance in the morning." Emily didn't respond. Dana raised her eyebrows. "Apparently, there's been a man sitting there every day. Some people assumed he was loitering near our back entrance. Others thought he might be dangerous." Emily's stomach tightened. She said nothing. "We know you've been charitable," Dana said carefully, "but this is still a business. Maybe you could consider supporting a shelter instead." Emily looked at her, really looked. "He's not a hazard," she said, voice flat. Dana gave the same corporate smile. "Perception, Emily. It's all about perception." That night, Emily arrived at work 15 minutes earlier than usual. She made sure no one saw her leave the kitchen. She left the coffee and pastry quietly, like a secret. The man nodded once. She nodded back. That was all. But secrets don't stay quiet forever. A week later, a new teenage hire, Jenna, saw her coming back through the back door and raised an eyebrow. "You're the one who gives food to that guy, huh?" Emily didn't answer. Jenna smirked and turned to a group of customers standing near the counter. "She's been feeding that bum for years," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. A middle-aged woman glanced over at Emily, then shook her head. "Poor thing. Thinking she's saving the world one croissant at a time." Emily turned away, back to the dough. Her hands worked automatically, but her face was stiff. It wasn't the insult that stung, it was how easily they stripped away a man's worth with a word. Bum! Like that erased everything else he might have been. At lunch, her coworker Brian pulled her aside. "Hey, no judgment," he said, the way people always did when they were absolutely judging. "But don't you think it sends the wrong message?" "What message?" she asked. He shrugged. "That it's okay to hang around here. That people like that can just sit where families walk their kids to school." People like that? She wanted to ask him what he meant. Dirty? Poor? Black? All of it? But she didn't, because she already knew. That night, Emily got home and found the napkin again. "Thank you for seeing me as a man." She stared at it longer than usual. 2 days later, her mother called. "Your boss told me about the review," her mom said carefully. "Honey, why do you always pick people the world has already given up on?" Emily leaned against the wall. "Because the world doesn't get to decide who matters." The next morning, it rained. The kind of rain that soaked through even the thickest coat. Emily stood at the window of the bakery, her apron damp from her run. The man sat on the bench like always, but this time his shoulders were trembling. The scarf was gone, probably stolen or lost. She watched as 2 teenage boys walked past him, laughing. One tossed something at his feet, a crumpled burger wrapper. He didn't flinch, didn't move. just sat there like the concrete was safer than the world. Emily's jaw tightened. She wrapped another scarf around the coffee, this one thicker. A navy blue knit her grandmother had made. She walked out the back and knelt to place it beside him. He looked up at her, water dripping from the tip of his nose. "You don't have to," he murmured. "I know," she said. The next day she found the scarf folded neatly beside the coffee cup, dry and untouched. But the napkin had a new line written on it. "I'll never let them see me break. But thank you for noticing when I almost did." Emily didn't show it to anyone. She didn't defend him to her co-workers. She didn't argue with her manager again. She just kept showing up. Because somewhere deep in her gut, she knew she wasn't just feeding a man. She was feeding a war the world never knew he fought. The wedding was only days away, and Emily was trying to keep everything calm. Trying. But it's hard to plan flowers and frosting when every conversation feels like a warning disguised as concern. Her mother had called 3 times that week already. "Emily," she sighed over the phone, "I know you mean well. I raised you that way. But this is your wedding, not a charity outreach." Emily had just finished tying ribbon around the bakery boxes. She stared at the neat little bows, trying to keep her voice even. "I'm not inviting him." "I didn't say that," her mother replied too quickly. "I just meant maybe some people don't belong in formal places." The silence after that wasn't long, but it cut deep. Even Marco, her fiancé, had raised an eyebrow once. "You never even spoke to him? Not once in 6 years?" Emily shrugged. He didn't need words. He needed to not be invisible. Marco had kissed her forehead and let it go. That's one of the reasons she loved him. He didn't understand everything, but he never tried to change her heart. Still, the pressure weighed heavy. At the bakery, her co-workers whispered louder now. They talked about seating charts and guest lists, like they were code for something else. "You think she's going to invite him?" "God, imagine the pictures. I wouldn't even want to walk down the same aisle." One afternoon, Jenna leaned in while icing cupcakes and said, "You know he might show up anyway, right? Some people don't understand boundaries." Emily didn't respond, because she wasn't sure what she would do if he did. Then came the letter. It wasn't mailed. No stamp, no postmark. Someone had delivered it by hand and left it at the front desk of the reception venue. The envelope was off-white, textured like old stationery. No name, just "To the bride." The wedding planner found it, thought it was some kind of prank or sentimental message from Marco. But when she opened it, the note inside made her pause. "Emily, tomorrow I will come, not for cake, but to honor a debt. No signature, no return address. Just that single line in slow, careful handwriting." The planner had brought it to her during rehearsal with a look of concern. "Do you know who sent this?" Emily read the line 3 times. She knew that writing. She'd seen it in faded pencil on napkins, in trembling strokes that still managed to carry weight. She didn't answer the planner. She just folded the letter slowly and tucked it into her purse. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Marco, staring at the ceiling while moonlight cut stripes across their blanket. She thought about the man, the bench, the scarf, the morning rain, and the question no one had ever asked. What was his story? People assumed he was broken. People assumed he had failed. But no one had stopped to ask how a man like him, so silent, so composed, ended up on that bench to begin with. Not even her. She had seen him, but had she ever truly seen him? The next morning, she went to the bakery for one last check before the big day. Her co-workers gave her fake smiles and stiff hugs. "We hope the ceremony's beautiful." "We're proud of you, Em." She thanked them, even though she could feel the tension under the surface. Before she left, she packed one last pastry. She wrapped it, like always. Fresh napkin. Fresh note. But this time, she didn't leave it on the bench. She held it in her hands and sat quietly, waiting. He didn't come. The bench stayed empty. Emily sat there for 20 minutes, her wedding day hours away, her dress still hanging untouched at home. Then she stood, walked to the bench, and placed the pastry down gently, like always. Except this time she said something out loud. "I hope you come." The church was glowing with soft golden light as guests arrived in their finest. Music floated gently from the string quartet near the altar. Everything was set. Except Emily. She stood at the small window in the bridal room, peeking out between the curtains. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her earrings. And then she saw him, standing at the far end of the church steps. A worn gray suit, shoes polished as best as possible, scarf neatly folded under his coat collar. His silver hair was combed, and he stood tall, even if his eyes showed hesitation. It was him. Her breath caught. The bench had been empty that morning. But now, here he was. Marco's cousin tapped the wedding planner. "Hey, do you know that man outside? Why is he standing there like that?" Another guest whispered, "Is he looking for food at a wedding now?" Emily didn't wait. She didn't ask for approval. She didn't care about timing or traditions or the shocked looks from her aunt. She lifted her gown and ran. The music hadn't even started. The photographer was still adjusting lenses. But Emily flew down the church foyer, past the open doors, past the guests, and straight toward him. She didn't slow down. She wrapped her arms around him and held him like he was family. He hesitated just a second, and then returned the embrace with a warmth so deep it nearly knocked the air from her lungs. "I still remember your eyes," she whispered, "that morning in 2017. He smiled, and this time it wasn't sad. "I remember every morning you made me feel human." The whispers behind them were getting louder. The wedding planner ran toward her, looking panicked. "Emily, the ceremony is about to start. Who is this?" But her words were cut off. Outside, tires screeched softly against the curb. 12 military vehicles pulled up to the front of the church in synchronized fashion. Doors opened, and out stepped 12 Marines in full United States dress blues, lined up with military precision. Their gloves were immaculate, their faces stone serious. Gasps rose from the guests. Someone dropped a champagne flute. It shattered on the marble tile. The Marines entered the church doors as one unit. They didn't look left or right. They marched directly toward Emily and the man by her side. The lead Marine stopped, his chest rising and falling beneath rows of medals. He saluted. Then, one by one, the others followed. The room had gone silent. Mouths hung open. A child asked in a whisper, "Why are they saluting him?" The captain's voice echoed across the hall. "On behalf of Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, we're here to honor the woman who saved one of our own." He turned to the man standing next to Emily. "This is Sergeant Marcus Lane. He saved 12 lives during an ambush in Kandahar in 2004. He carried me on his back for 4 blocks under direct fire. Emily blinked, stunned. The captain nodded once. He never claimed his medal, never used his benefits. After losing his family in a car crash in 2016, he disappeared. He chose silence. Someone in the back row whispered, "My God!" "He lived on that bench for 6 years," the captain continued, "and never told a soul who he was." Emily looked at Marcus. He kept his eyes forward, shoulders back, jaw locked. The captain softened. But because of one woman, who never asked for thanks, who never asked for his story, he survived. He turned to Emily. "You fed him. You left him notes. You gave him a reason to wake up. You didn't know he was a war hero, and that's what makes you one, too." A Marine stepped forward with a small velvet box. Inside, a Silver Star medal, polished but unclaimed. Beside it, a photograph. Young Marcus, blood on his uniform, dragging another Marine to safety. It was the captain. Tears welled in his eyes as he placed the medal into Emily's hands. "If not for him, I wouldn't be alive. And if not for you, he might not be either." Emily couldn't speak. Her makeup was gone, tears streaming freely. Behind her, the crowd had changed. The judgment in their faces was now shame. Jenna, her former co-worker, sat frozen near the aisle. Another guest stood up, voice shaking. "We're not just witnessing a wedding. We're witnessing an honor ceremony." Marco stepped forward from the altar. He walked straight to Marcus, extended his hand. "Sir," he said quietly, "would you do the honor of walking her down the aisle?" Marcus's hands trembled for a moment. Then he nodded. He took Emily's arm, and together they turned toward the altar, walking slowly, in complete silence, as the Marines stood on either side, forming a corridor of respect. Not a single camera flashed. Not a single person whispered. Because finally, everyone saw him. Not as a man on a bench, but as a man who never asked to be honored, and yet earned it every single day. The Marines stood still, their uniforms like a wall of silent power. The church, once filled with polite judgment and muttered curiosity, was now heavy with something else: respect. The kind you can't fake, the kind that settles into your chest and makes you ashamed for not having felt it sooner. Captain Duncan stepped back as Marcus and Emily reached the altar. Marco nodded at both of them, then took Emily's hand. For a moment, none of them spoke. Just 3 people standing in the middle of something much bigger than a wedding. Then one of the bridesmaids stepped forward, mascara streaked from crying. "I work with Emily at the bakery," she said, voice cracking. "She used to arrive earlier than everyone else, to bake extra. She paid for those pastries herself." Another co-worker stood beside her, eyes lowered. We teased her. We thought she was wasting food on a stranger. We thought she was being naive." Her voice broke. "I didn't know she was keeping someone alive." A ripple of shame passed through the crowd. People who had once whispered behind Emily's back now looked at her with something closer to reverence. The captain nodded, then looked at Marcus. "Sergeant Lane refused to accept help for years," he said. "But after reconnecting with us, we got him into VA care. He's finally receiving the benefits he earned. But it wasn't the system that saved him. It was a woman with coffee and a paper napkin." Marcus stepped forward. His posture was perfect, but you could see the tremor in his hands. "I didn't want to be thanked," he said, his voice gravelly but clear. After losing my wife and daughter, I couldn't bear people calling me a hero when I couldn't even save my own family. His eyes scanned the room, not angry, just honest. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to be seen, until she started seeing me anyway. He turned to Emily. You never asked who I was. You never wanted anything back. You just fed me, saw me, and left words that gave me one more day. Then another. Then another. He paused, swallowing hard. You gave a broken man a reason to be upright again. Emily touched his arm, tears in her eyes but no words in her mouth. Captain Duncan looked around at the guests. In the Corps, he said, we have a code. No man left behind. Emily Sanchez understood that code better than people who've worn this uniform for decades. He turned toward the Marines behind him. I served with Marcus. I owe him my life. But today, we all owe her our silence. We all owe her our respect. Another Marine stepped forward, placing a framed citation of the Silver Star into Emily's hands. For actions in Kandahar, he read aloud, Sergeant Marcus Lane carried 12 wounded men out of enemy fire after being wounded himself. He refused medevac and returned to the line until every man was accounted for. Emily blinked, staring at the paper, her fingers trembling as they touched the glass. She had never known, and yet she had always known. Because you don't need someone's resume to decide whether or not they deserve dignity. Jenna, who had once mocked her behind the counter, stood near the back of the church, silent, her face pale. A guest whispered, I feel so ashamed. We all looked at him like he was nothing. Another said, he never needed to prove anything. He already did. Marcus turned to the Marines. You all came here for me? Captain Duncan replied, for you, for her, for everything we forgot to honor. Marcus nodded slowly, then looked at Emily again. I have nothing to give you but this truth, he said quietly, and my presence. Emily smiled through her tears. It's more than enough. Outside the church, the 12 Marines stepped aside, forming a human corridor. As Emily and Marco walked hand in hand back down the aisle, Marcus walked behind them. Not as a burden, not as a guest, but as a man restored. The wedding became something far more than Emily had imagined. There were no fireworks, no big press coverage, just quiet tears, soft applause, and the silent reverence of 12 Marines standing in formation for a woman who never asked to be seen. But her story didn't end at the altar. It began again. After the honeymoon, Emily didn't return to Sunrise Bakery. She and Marco used their wedding gift money, not for a cruise, not for a house upgrade, but for a different kind of future. They rented a small building near the transit center. Old, a little worn, but with a kitchen and space for long tables. They called it the Quiet Plate. Every morning at 6 a.m., Emily showed up and brewed coffee. Fresh rolls, buttered biscuits, eggs when donations allowed. She served breakfast to veterans who lived on the street, slept in cars, or carried too many ghosts to stay in shelters. There were no cameras, no speeches, just a handwritten sign near the entrance. Feeding one person may feed an entire life. Emily framed the old napkin and hung it above the serving counter. Thank you for seeing me as a man. Beneath it, she placed her own addition. Everyone who walks through this door has a story worth knowing. She didn't see Marcus again for a while, but once a month, without fail, a postcard would arrive. always postmarked from a different state. Always the same message, written in his distinct handwriting. Every breakfast is a salute. Thank you, Emily. Sometimes there was a sketch on the back, a coffee cup, a folded scarf, a wooden bench. Captain Duncan had told her Marcus was now using his benefits, that he was getting treatment, living in veteran housing, attending therapy, that the Corps had stepped up once they found him again. He's doing okay now, Duncan had said, but don't let them give us the credit. We lost track of him. You didn't. On the first anniversary of the wedding, Emily arrived early to the quiet plate. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, tied her apron, and paused. 12 Marines were standing outside, each holding a single flower. No uniforms, just jeans, jackets, old boots, quiet faces. We'll be taking shifts volunteering here, Duncan said with a nod. This honor isn't one we're going to forget. She didn't cry, not this time. She just opened the door and let them in. That winter, the quiet plate became a known name in San Diego. No media hype. Just word of mouth from veteran to veteran. A place where no one asked why you were hungry. No one made you explain how you got there. You just sat. And someone handed you a hot meal, a hot drink, and maybe, if you stayed long enough, a little bit of warmth you hadn't felt in years. Sometimes, Emily would look out the front window toward the street and see a man in a long coat passing by. Sometimes she thought it might be Marcus, but he never came inside. Not because he wasn't welcome, but because, maybe, some gifts don't need to be repeated. They just need to echo. One morning, a young volunteer asked Emily, "Why do you do all this? Every day?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked up at the napkin on the wall. Then she smiled and said, "Because some heroes eat alone. And sometimes they just need someone to sit near them, long enough to remind them they're still seen."